It is now my privilege and my honor to be able to introduce Rabbi Daniel Raccah, who will be delivering the third of the three shiurim this morning. Again, I remind everyone that this afternoon at 4:45, we'll have Rabbi Yehuda Glick and Rabbi Moshe Terragan. And then again at 5:45, there will be a tour of Heron in Israel. But now we have the extraordinary honor of hearing Rabbi Daniel Raccah, who has spoken to us so many times in our shul, but most importantly is one of the great leaders in our community. His topic today is Hester Panim, a peek behind Hashem's providential mask. I thank him for continuing the minhag that we have of having him at this time. Just to remind everyone as well, Chatzot today is at 12:57, which is right at when Rabbi Raccah will be concluding. And after that point, there are a number of things we're able to do, including sitting on regular high chairs. Mincha today will be at 1:30 at KINS, and again, Mincha will be at 7 o'clock this evening. Without any further ado, it is my privilege to introduce Rabbi Daniel Raccah.
I thank Rabbi Matenke. I hope you'll understand shortly that I'm really not such a good technology individual in this regard. Okay, I thank Rabbi Matenke, and Baruch Hashem, it's been over, I believe, 2 decades that we've been having this shiur, that I've been participating in it, and each time it's an honor, and I truly feel privileged to be able to share with you on a day such as Tisha B'Av. First up is that today's shiur is dedicated with hopes of a refuah shlema, complete and full recovery for Leah bat Rivka and Yekutil Yehuda ben Pesa Livsha and Raphael ben Naya ben Shifra. May Hashem grant them and all Cholei Yisrael a full recovery. May they live a long life of good health and happiness. As well, today's shiur is dedicated in memory of Miriam Sarah bat Shalomo and Mazal Tov. May her neshama have an aliyah tehei nishmatat v'cha b'tzorah chaim. So the Sfardim have one of the kinot that we say on the night of Tisha B'Av. It's a kinah that's called Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. Now, that's not an error. It is not mixing up Pesach with Tisha B'Av, but rather it's a contrast. It's a contrast between the night of Pesach, full of its joy and its celebration, and the night of Tisha B'Av with all its mourning and all of its sorrow. We also have one for Tisha B'Av Day. And on Tisha B'Av Day, it's called Ma nishtana yom zeh mikol hashanan. Which way is this day different than the rest of the year? And it's similarly a contrast between the days of happiness, the days of celebration, the days of joy, and Tisha B'Av, where we're in such sorrow and such sadness. Just extending that thought to our present shiur today, how is this particular Tisha B'Av different than all the other years, than all the other Tisha B'Avs? And of course, the answer is obvious. We all understand this, that today we're not gathered together in the same place. We're not able to congregate together. Rather, each and every one of us is in our private little own galut, separated and exiled from the ability to fully congregate. Now, some words in the English language, they're words that through overuse or reach a saturation point, where they truly really lose their true meaning, and they're no longer able to convey the true intent of the word. Example of such a word is the word awesome. Today, it no longer means what it really is intended to mean because of its overuse. Another such word, which due to COVID-19 has reached that pinnacle, is the word unprecedented. Through COVID, being that it is so unusual, so uncommon, something that we really have never experienced in our lifetimes, and that it continues to cycle through other new elements of it that are unprecedented, even that word already is losing a little bit of its connotation. But when we think about when we think about COVID-19 today, and I believe it's reasonable to say that we will be thinking about it in Bezrat Hashem 10, 20 years from now, I believe that we'll be able to identify one symbol that dominates our thoughts in association and connotation and connection with COVID-19. And of course, that would be the ubiquitous mask. And if you'll bear with me, I will try to even give you a little picture here. The mask, in case you're laughing, that's not a bad mask. The mask is a symbol of what we're undergoing now. I believe that we can utilize this symbol. I believe that we can utilize this symbol to maybe teach us a little bit of a lesson about the concept of divine providence, of Hashgacha Pratit, but the manner in which it's active, the manner in which today Hashgacha Pratit is in engagement with us. I'm speaking specifically about a term called Hastarat Panim, Hashem hiding his face. Here's the pasuk where this concept comes to the fore for the first time. Pasuk says, a pasuk in Devarim, Ve'anochi astir panai bayom hahu, and I, says Hashem, I will hide my countenance, I will hide my face on this day. Al kol ra'ah asher asa, for all the bad that the Jewish people will have done. Kifana el Elohim acherim, because they have turned to other gods. And I have to share with you that whatever quotations that you're going to see today during my shiur, all taken from the wonderful app called Sefaria. So don't think that I was able to type all that out. I'm using Sefaria. Okay, but the pasuk says clearly that there is a concept of the hiding of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's face, and that hiding of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's face has consequences in application in our day-to-day lives, and it denotes a certain sense of disengagement or apparent disengagement. In a certain way, Hashem wearing a mask. So maybe that symbol, that idea could be utilized to teach us something today. So therefore, what I'm going to do today is a bit different than I've done in previous years, as I always try to change things up a little bit. But today, I think it's appropriate possibly to focus on the theology a bit more than the Divrei Musar. And through that, of course, we will have some Divrei Musar. And the idea here being to try to arrive at a little bit of a better understanding of the concept of Hastarat Panim, the concept of the hiding of God's countenance, but within a larger context of what Hashgacha Pratit is, divine providence. I believe if we accomplish this correctly, I believe that this will allow us to face and understand the dangers that we are now encountering better. I think more importantly, it will allow, I would hope it would allow people, or would permit people, to see a perspective of the obligation that we have of being very serious about security and safety in this period, and to not deal with it in a flippant manner, in a certain bravado of it's not going to happen to me, or I'm not worried about it, or if God really wanted it to happen to me, it'll happen to me. As I'm going to share with you today, all of those approaches are wrong. Not only are they wrong, but they bear with them, those approaches bear with them a certain level of sin, a certain level of incorrectness in attitude and behavior vis-a-vis the period that we're in. Okay, so what I'm going to do with you today is essentially something which you can do on your own. You don't really need me at all. I'm going to utilize primarily the writing of Reb Chaim Friedlander. He has an extremely comprehensive approach to this very complicated subject. It's extremely nuanced, and I hope we'll be able to share with you his words in the proper way. You can read it. It's in his book Siftei Chaim. It's in Pirkei Emunah Hashgacha in the first volume. You easily read it there. You don't require me at all. Bez Hashem, we're going to go through some of the sections there, and Bezrat Hashem, hopefully through the process, you'll hopefully come to a better understanding of Hashgacha Pratit, of Hastarat Panim, and its application to us. So we'll begin. When Rav Friedlander is speaking about the idea of Hashgacha Pratit, he, in the section that we'll be reading about, he brings us a quotation from the famous Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Rabbi Moshe Cordovero was one of the premier Mikubalim in the famous heyday, the highlighted time of Sfat in the 1500s. He was an expositor of the concepts of Kabbalah in the most eloquent manner. And in a certain way, he systemized the understanding of Kabbalah in its very, very, very readable fashion. Okay. In one of the Sfarim that he wrote called Shi'ur Koma, he has extended sections about the idea of Hashgacha Pratit, and we'll read you some of the ideas that he has there, and then Be'ez Hashem will give you the explanation, and all of this comes from Rav Friedlander. He writes as follows: Hashgachat bnei Adam bifratit betovatam uvra'atam. It's important to understand when we speak about Hashgacha Pratit, when we speak about divine providence, we have to understand that it's specific to the person, and it's for the good and for the bad. Bivneihem, it affects the person's children, family, uva'alei chayim, as well as the person's livestock or animals in the sense of possession, asher lahem, what they may have, uva'avodat hasadeh, as well as their, what we will call in an agricultural environment, their place of business, the field. Akol hu mushkach, everything is overseen by Kadosh Baruch Hu. Everything is guided by a Kadosh Baruch Hu's divine providence. Leharbot imi yasher, to give him more if he goes in the correct path. L'ma'et im le'ra, im ye'ra, and to chas v'shalom reduce it if the person does something which is incorrect. So in short, it's not just the individual human being, his personal, the individual, the body of the person that is overseen by the Hashgachat Hashem, that is overseen by the divine providence, but everything that's in his environment, everything that is in his field, whether it be his possessions, whether it be his family, all of those things are also overseen by the Hashgacha Pratit. Okay, so we have a broader sense that divine providence really engages with the entirety of the human experience. In a different section, and here's where we begin to engage the idea of Astarat Panim. Rav Moshe Cordovero writes as follows: Siluka hashgacha, there is the possibility, there is the idea that a Kadosh Baruch Hu, chas v'shalom, would remove his divine providence, and we will explain what this means. V'nishar ha'adam el hamikrim, a man will be left to the devices of the world, left to nature, to randomness, another word which is misused. Kinyan v'anochi hastir panai mehem v'hayeh lechol. This is a quotation. I will show you the pasuk. Bear with me as I get you there. I think this is it. Yeah. Pasuk says, "V'chara pibo bayom hahu," and my anger will be kindled against them on that day. Va'azavtim, and I will abandon them. Here it comes. V'istarti fanai mehem, and I will hide my face from them. V'haya le'echol, and they will be available like ready prey. Umsa'u ra'ot rabot v'tzarot, and they will befall them horrible things and tragedies. Ve'amar b'yomahu, and they will say on that day, "Halo al ki ein Elohai b'kirbi mitzaoni haraot eile." It is surely because a Kadosh Baruch Hu is not within me that these evil things have happened to me. Okay, so that's the pasuk. So that pasuk essentially tells us what? That if a Kadosh Baruch Hu activates the Hastarat Panim, at the Hastarat Panim method of Hashgacha, if a Kadosh Baruch Hu activates that hiding of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's face, the Haya Le'echol, we are available. We're like ready prey. We are in danger to potentially be harmed by anything around us, whether that be natural, whether that be through humans, through governance. We're vulnerable. We are no longer fully defended and protected. The force field The shield is down. It says from Moshe Kodoveru, "V'hainu rov ma'aseh ha'amim imanu ata b'galotem." This explains the majority of what the goyim do to us today in our exile. In other words, when we experience from the goyim negative behavior, it's hastarat panim. It's an element of a Kadosh Baruch Hu hiding his face. And he adds, "V'chayotze b'zeh," and similar to this or associated with this, efshar le'adam lishamer al yedei tachbula tiv'it. Once you are no longer defended, shielded by the divine hashgacha fully, so then you are allowed to, and you are now therefore in a situation of potential harm or danger. You can then employ your own methods. You can then employ your own processes to protect yourself. In other words, what we would call hishtadlut. The person will be obligated at that point to employ other methodologies to protect himself from the potential harms of the situation or the society or the conditions of the time. This is what the pasuk means when it says, and here I will show it to you. Here it comes, bear with me. Sinim pachim bederech ikesh. Here it translates it as thorns and snares are in the path of the crooked. But the Gemara utilizes this more in the terms of hot and cold. The heat and the cold are in the paths of the crooked. Shomer nafsho yirchak mehem. A person who values his life will keep far from them. In other words, if you're in a situation in which you're in potential danger from natural circumstances, it's incumbent upon you. You are required. You're obligated to protect yourselves from that potential harm. Simple example: if it's a freezing cold day, temperature is below zero, and you walk outside in shirt sleeves, you're running the risk of harming yourself. You're running the risk of getting a cold. You're running the risk of getting of catching some kind of an illness, by virtue of the fact that you did not protect yourself. If you want to be crooked about this, if you want to not look at this correctly, you're running the risk potentially of harming yourself. Similarly, in the time when there is a potential ability to catch an illness, which can be transmitted with ease, one has an obligation to protect himself from that and to utilize the methodologies that we are instructed to do to protect oneself from potential harm. It's an obligation. And one who doesn't do that is ikesh, is a person who's crooked. Shomer nafsho yirchak mehem. A person who should safeguard his soul by distancing oneself from this. Therefore, says Rav Moshe Cordovero, hu hester panim et Hashem. This is the idea of Hashem hiding his face. Ye machamat avono azuv el hateva ve'hizdamen. And by virtue of that, the person Chalila v'chas will be, so to speak, abandoned. We'll understand better what that means in a moment. Abandoned by Hashem's divine providence, and left to nature, to the circumstances of his time. Under those conditions, a person has an obligation to protect himself, so he shouldn't be harmed. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us that person should be very cautious in a situation where there is evident hastarat panim, where there is clear hiding of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's face, where there is danger rampant and prevalent, that a person has an obligation to protect themselves. Now, there are those unique individuals who live a life of such purity and holiness that for most situations, and we will give exceptions to those in a little while down the road, in most situations, they are safeguarded by this, by virtue of the protection given to them by Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is based on a pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'sadikim kikfir yiftach." A sadiq is somewhat like a young lion. He doesn't have to be afraid of anything. In other words, because the sadiq has such a level of connection to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, he does not have to resort to protections and natural means. Even the simplest, the most basic of protections suffice for him. And this is the idea, says Moshe Kodeveru, by David HaMelech. And let me show you the pasuk. Bear with me. This is the pasuk. This is when David HaMelech goes to meet Goliath. When he goes to meet Goliath. And this is what the pasuk says. Vayomer David el Plishti. David HaMelech said to Goliath, you're coming to me with a sword, you're coming to me with a spear, you got your javelin, you've got all these protections, you're really entirely armed. But I'm coming to you in the name of God. The Lord of the host of Israel, that you have defied. Says David HaMelech, on this day God will deliver you into my hands, and I'm going to hit you. I'm going to remove your head from on your body. And I will give as carcasses in the Philistine camp today. To the birds and to the animals of the field. The whole land will know Israel, there is a God to the Jewish people. Now pay attention to this one. And the entire congregation will know. God does not need to give victory through sword and through spear. God, to God is the war. He will give you into our hands. In other words, says David HaMelech to Goliath, David HaMelech says to Goliath, that in my situation, I feel sufficiently confident that I'm able to utilize even these well reduced methodologies of basic action. I'm not going to come to you with a sword. I'm just going to take a bunch of stones. And I feel that I'm confident that the Kadosh Baruch Hu will protect me. That's the level of bitachon of a tzaddik. That's the level of faith of the tzaddik. And if you're on the level of David HaMelech, you can do that. You're able to do that. And we're going to show in a moment, not in all circumstances. In that particular one, David HaMelech was able to do that. And when he did that, he was successful in battle. So for the tzaddik, the idea of astarat panim, the idea of Hashem hiding his face, is severely reduced because of his closeness. His bond to Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Ashkachat Hashem, is always upon him, and he does not need to resort to the normal protections that the rest of us would require. However, who of us is going to say that we're David HaMelech? If a person goes out to battle and says, I'm going to act like David HaMelech, I'm going to take a couple stones with my slingshot, that's going to be enough. I'm not going to go with a sword. I'm not going to go with a spear. It says Moshe Kodeveru, a person who does that, you're responsible for your life. You'll be considered a fool that has false belief, false trust. Similarly, in many other situations. So said in simpler terms, even though there exists such a level of divine providence that protects the tzaddikim, even from great harm, and they're able to reutilize methodologies much less generally successful than others, but that's for the tzaddikim. And God forbid, if a person misjudges himself, then chas v'shalom, they run the risk of, God forbid, completely losing their life. Chalila v'chas. And he gives the example, a famous example by Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu, when the moment comes to meet his brother, Yaakov Avinu turns to Kadosh Baruch Hu and begs him for protection. The Chachamim say, I don't understand. Why is Yaakov Avinu so afraid? Kadosh Baruch Hu promised him, I'm going to be with you, and I will protect you. And I will return you. Kadosh Baruch Hu protected him. Why is Yaakov Avinu afraid? He's sending Esav a gift. He's separating his camp into two parts, preparing for war. Why is he afraid? David HaMelech, Yaakov Avinu is returning to do the mitzvah of Kibbutz Av V'Em now. And Yaakov Avinu has been promised by Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ushmarticha b'chol asher telech. Hashem promised him that he will protect him. Why is David HaMelech? Why is Yaakov Avinu afraid? So the Gemara answers this. The Gemara says, Shema yigrom achet. Yaakov Avinu said, correct, Hashem promised me that. And if I was on that level, at that moment, at that time, that Hashem made me that promise, that I would be safe. But who's to say that I'm on that level today? Maybe I sinned. And therefore, David HaMelech is concerned that potentially, God forbid, he will lose the divine, David HaMelech. Yaakov Avinu is afraid, that he'll lose the divine protection. So even Yaakov Avinu, forgive me, I'm tired. Even Yaakov Avinu is frightened, he's afraid that he may potentially lose the divine protection. Thus, when a person is in a situation of potential hastarat panim, he has the obligation to protect himself. He cannot rely on the fact that maybe he's a tzaddik. Because take a look, Yaakov Avinu didn't do it. Yaakov Avinu was given a direct divine promise by Hashem himself, telling him that he'll be protected. And yet David HaMelech was concerned, potentially Chalil v'chas, he will not be able to be saved by virtue of the fact that Hashem will hide his face because David HaMelech has sinned. Okay, so the outcome of this is what? The outcome of this is that there is a concept of astarat panim. There is a concept where a person could potentially have a Kadosh Baruch Hu hide his face. Under those conditions, if a person is not worthy, and by the way, that's the vast majority of us, not chas v'shalom because we're not trying, but we're not the great tzaddikim of the world. We run the risk of potential harm. And thus, for example, nobody would be a fool to say they would just walk into the middle of Lakeshore Drive during rush hour and assume that everything will be fine. That would be foolish. Similarly, in all circumstances where there's evident and present danger, a person has obligation to resort to all methods of protection, not to assume that they'll be protected by some miraculous event, because miraculous events are for the tzaddikim. A person has obligation, therefore, to be mishtadel, to make the efforts to utilize the natural protections that we afford ourselves by virtue of the efforts that we make. Let's dig into this a little bit more. Let's try to understand this better. The implication of this is, therefore, says Rabbi Friedlander, that really there's no schar v'onish then. There really, at least for many things, there would not be reward and punishment. Namely, if Hashem just leaves us to randomness, leaves us to the conditions, then potentially it's really not dependent upon whether we're righteous or not. It has to do with whether some harm will come to us through some natural means. It really is nothing to do with our behavior at all. So Rabbi Friedlander says this is not correct, and he's going to explain this, and this is where it gets important. So Rabbi Friedlander says that, of course, whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu make something in the world, of course it's associated with reward and punishment for the most part. So, for example, if God forbid there's an accident, somebody is hurt in the accident, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has determined that person should be affected in that way. Hashem has arranged the scenario, set the stage, that the parties will be involved in something together because each one of them has a reason why they need to be affected by it. And let's explain this a little bit better. The pasuk says the idea of, just watching the time, the idea of the galut. If a person kills somebody bishogeg, if somebody kills somebody without intent, the pasuk says as follows: if there is a situation where a person did not have premeditation, and God brought them together. God brought this person to his hand, and the person died. The person killed somebody by mistake. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I will identify a place where that person will then be able to escape to and be safe. This is the idea of what we call galut, the idea of being exiled by virtue of the fact that somebody killed somebody without intent. But then the Gemara explains how this would happen or why this would happen, what the divine hand is in this. The Gemara writes as follows: imagine you had two people. One person killed somebody else intentionally, but nobody saw it. There are no witnesses. Nobody knows about it. So therefore, he's not punished. And another individual killed somebody by mistake, and again, there were no witnesses. So it says the Gemara, what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu do? He brings these two people together. He has the murderer with intent, the premeditated murderer, be killed unintentionally by the person who did an unintentional murder earlier, because those two together, such that the one who is deserving of death because he killed somebody intentionally will die, and the one who did not kill intentionally will get to go to Galut, because in this particular situation, there would be witnesses. And this pasuk says, "Veha Elohim ina liyado." It's God who will bring that person to that situation. In other words, even when what looks like an accident, a fellow fell off a ladder unintentionally, landed on somebody and killed him. There was no premeditation. He slipped, he fell. There were witnesses. Everybody saw it. They don't know one another. They have nothing with it to do with one another. The Elohim Niyaliyado, Kadosh Baruch Hu arranges it that way. That is the methodology of divine interaction. So even if to our eye it looks like a Kadosh Baruch Hu had nothing to do with this, it's not the case. And even to our eye, it has nothing to do with reward and punishment. It's not the case. The fact that this one died is because he was deserving of death. And the fact that that one has to go to Galut is because he was deserving of that as well. So the reality of that is there's no real mikre. There is no real situation of happenstance, an act of randomness, an act without intent. There is no such thing vis-a-vis HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rather, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does through his interaction with the world is with intent, and therefore can be associated in most situations to reward and punishment. Well, if that's the case, according to what we just said now, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the ultimate decider, the ultimate individual entity of decision, if that is the case, so then what did Rav Moshe Cordovero mean when he told us? And the Rambam says this, and the Ramban says this, and this is very common in the earlier philosophers, that there is the idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu removing his hashgacha and the person being left to randomness, left to nature. If Hashem is always deciding, then how is that? And here's where we get to the interesting part. So there are in actuality two forms of providence. There are two methodologies of oversight. The first one is for the righteous, that they're not bound by the usual restrictions of nature. So, for example, if a fire, God forbid, breaks out and burns down a neighborhood, the righteous person, he doesn't have to worry. His house will be unaffected. The fire will skirt it, will go around it. People actually saw this in Baghdad. There was a field in the time of Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai. There was a field that he owned, and people saw this, that there was a flood. The river overflowed. All the fields around his were inundated and flooded. And it was as if there was a wall, an invisible wall, that protected the field of Rabbeinu Yosef Chaim. No water went in there. The water just stood. People witnessed this. They saw this. Yeah, so if you're on that level, yes, things like that could occur. Then there is the hashgacha of the majority of people, that Hashem works behind the scenes, so to speak, behind his mask, with hastarat panim, the hiding of his countenance. And through that, the person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will affect a person with reward or punishment based upon their behavior. But because of that, a new obligation is created for the person, a new responsibility, that he has to make the effort that he has to engage with natural order. And Friedlander points this out very beautifully from Adam HaRishon, the same exact person before the sin and after the sin. Before the sin, the Gemara tells us, Adam HaRishon Meisav beGan Eden Haya. Adam HaRishon would sit at a feast in Gan Eden before the sin. Angels would grill meat for him. Prepare wine for him. That was before the sin, right? Before the sin, Adam HaRishon had it, so to speak, easy. Didn't have to work at all. Angels served him. After the sin, you want to eat? No problem. You got to sweat by the sweat of your brow. You got to plow. You got to plant. You got to harvest. You have to work. And what happens if you don't work? You starve. That's the outcome. If a person doesn't work, they starve. That is the Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Due to the sin of Adam HaRishon, it created an obligation for him to do hishtadlut, to do the effort to provide for himself. He lost the right. The privilege was gone, where the angels are going to be your personal butlers and waiters. And now you have to protect yourself. Now you have to provide for yourself. And if you do not do that, then you starve, and it's on you. Now, says Rav Friedlander, obviously between those two goalposts, there's a lot of real estate, meaning there's a lot of other levels in between those goalposts. For example, the Gemara tells us that in the desert, when the Jews received the man, so the man fell from the heavens, right? So it depended where it would fall relative to any individual, depended upon their righteousness. If you were a great tzaddik, it landed at your door. If you were a Benoni, if you're in the middle, you needed to go out a little bit, but it wasn't that far. If you were a Raccah, you had to walk. You had to walk. So in other words, it's not just simply binary, super tzaddik, super Raccah, just two options. There are infinite amount of levels, infinite amount of options in between, from the most righteous to the most wicked, and everything in between. And each one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's level of hastara, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's level of masking himself, is relative to the situation. And this is brought out, and this was the pasuk that I shared with you by David HaMelech. By David HaMelech, he was at a level that he was able to rely on a minimum amount of effort in order to be able to kill Goliath. Didn't have to go out with a sword. Even with a small stone, he was able to kill Goliath. In application to, for example, feeding himself, for David HaMelech, he wouldn't have to work as hard in order to provide for himself. The smallest amount of effort for David HaMelech would return sufficient that he's able to eat. Doesn't require that much. But for the majority of people, you have to work very hard, because for not on the level of David HaMelech, the ishtadlut that is required, the amount of effort that is required at our proportional to our level, requires us a lot more effort. So therefore, for us, we have the obligation to protect ourselves from any potential harm, cannot rely that some kind of a miracle is going to occur. We have the obligation to protect ourselves. And therefore, if a person, for example, is not cautious and not careful, and they run the risk of contracting some illness, or contracting or affecting themselves in a negative way. This gets amped up, though. This is ratcheted up. The level of effort that we are required, the amount of protective measures that we must apply, increases in moments of danger. And this is a clear passage in the Gemara. The Gemara tells us as follows: Kivan shenitan reshut lemashchit, once the destructive energy is given free rein, Eino mavchim bein tzadikim lareshaim. He doesn't know the difference between the righteous and the wicked. What does that mean? That means, pay attention now. That means at a time of sakana, if there is a moment of divine judgment, moment of din, severity, so there is clear and present danger, clear and present, sakana. Even the righteous are in danger. Even the righteous are in danger of harm. And they are therefore also obligated to utilize all methodologies of protection. And a person is not allowed to say, well, I'm a righteous person, I don't have to do anything. That is a sin because it allows the person potential harm. In such a situation, when the mashchit, when the destructive energy, destructive force is given free rein, time of sakana, even the righteous aren't safe. So therefore, even the righteous have an obligation to protect themselves. And if they don't, yitchayev benafsho. The language is, he is harming himself. He is responsible for his own harm. And it's explicit in passage of the Gemara. Gemara writes, "Leolam al yamor adam b'makom sakana lomar shosim lo nes." Person should never stand in a place of danger and say, "Oh, not a problem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to perform a miracle for me." Why? Shema enosim lo nes. Maybe God will decide He's not going to do a miracle for them. Under those conditions, a person has an obligation to protect themselves. So maybe someone's going to say, "Oh, you know what? I didn't protect myself and nothing happened to me." So it's really, one isn't obligated to, you see, because if nothing happened to me. Says the Gemara, and if the person anyways places himself in potential harm and does not take the protective measures that he's obligated to take, and they do a miracle for him and they protect him at a time where he was in danger and potentially had the risk of being harmed, but in heaven they protected him anyways to miraculous means, menakim lo mitzchuyotav. They cut your credit. So if in Shemaim you had 100 points of credit, they cut your points. They reduce the amount of points. They reduce your zchuyot. They reduce the merits that you have because you had to call on divine mercy to protect you by supernatural means at a time where you were obligated to protect yourself by natural means. So said in simpler terms, if a person is in a place of danger, and therefore they're obligated, even the righteous are obligated to protect themselves at a heightened level, and the person doesn't protect himself, being foolhardy, and he says himself, "No, I'm not concerned by this. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I don't have to worry about it." And indeed, nothing happens. So he walks around with an attitude of, "You see, I was right. Nothing happened." It doesn't mean that it didn't cost you for that not happening. It's entirely possible that the person will get to Shemaim after 120 years and find his level of mitzvot, his reward has been reduced by virtue of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to engage with heightened measures of protection for that person and therefore had to draw on that person's credit. Got to be careful. And we see this explicitly. It's not even that complicated. Where do we see this? In Egypt. When the Jews were in Egypt on the night that they were freed from Egypt, Pasuk tells us, no Jew should leave his house until the morning. No Jew. It's sad that this past Pesach, we were exactly in the same situation. Nobody was supposed to go outside. And why weren't you supposed to go outside in Egypt? Because the mashchit, the destructive energy was out there. And therefore, even a Jew who was not the intended target in Egypt was not the intended target. The intended target were Egyptians. But being that the mashchit is out, even a Jew would run the risk of harm if he were to go outside. And therefore, a person had an obligation to protect himself. The long and short of this is how cautious we have to be, how careful we need to be to not assume that we're so righteous that we can be protected. Now it gets even worse. Pay attention to this now. So Rav Moshe Cordovero throws out a line. Moshe Cordovero throws out a line that it is possible, he writes as follows: it's possible that if there was a boat, and on this boat there was a great many people, many of whom were on God's list of destruction, and there was one tzaddik, there was one righteous person. Says Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, even if the tzaddik was not chayav, even if tzaddik had not sinned and was deserving of death, still a Kadosh Baruch Hu, because of all the wicked people who are on the boat deserving of death, Hashem could sink the boat, kill the wicked people, and even the tzaddik could also die. So says for Friedlander, but why? Why would the righteous person die if he's not deserving of death if he's on the boat? I understand the wicked people dying. I hear that. The wicked people died. I understand they were deserving of death. But why would the tzaddik die? And Rosh Kadrero says it can happen. So says for Friedlander, the reason for this is because at the time that there is a makom sakana, at a time there is a moment of danger, a person requires more protection, requires more zchuyot than in general. That was the passage in Gemara Shabbat that I just quoted to you, that a person should not go into a place of sakana, assuming that to do a miracle for him, because maybe they won't do a miracle for him. But if they do a miracle for him, they take away his zchuyot. So said in simpler terms, it's possible that a person would require more zchuyot under those conditions in a place of sakana, and if they don't have that heightened level of reward, the heightened level of protection, that heightened level of credit, they may die. So an application over here, when the tzaddik got on the boat, boats by definition are a place of sakana. That's why if a person gets into a boat and crosses the ocean, it needs to say hagomel. So if you're on the boat and you're in a place of sakana and a storm arrives, at that moment you need a higher level. You need a higher level of zchut. If you don't have it, even if you're a tzaddik, if you don't have it, you can possibly die. And this is explicit in the passage in Gemara in Menachot. Gemara in Menachot writes as follows. Gemara shares with us that an angel had a conversation with Rav Katina. And this is what the conversation they had. Malacha ashkechel Rav Katina, the Michse Sadina, an angel saw Rav Katina that was dressed in a garment that does not require tzitziot. That does not require tzitziot. Amarle Katina, Katina. The angel said to him, "Oh, Katina, Katina. Sadina bekaita, you wear this lighter garment in the summer. Visar b'levisitva, and in the winter you wear wear a heavier garment. But neither of them are obligated to have tzitziot. And neither of them have four corners. Neither of them are obligated. Tzitzit matehele. What's going to happen to the tzitziot? You're not wearing tzitziot." So says Rav Katina, Amarle, say, I'm not obligated to wear the tzitziot. You just told me yourself. It's not a four-cornered garment. It's not obligated in tzitzit. So are you going to punish me because I'm not fulfilling a mitzvah that I'm not obligated to fulfill under these conditions? Amarle, the angel said to him, at a time when there is divine anger, the time of divine retribution, a time of divine punishment, on Shinan, they will punish you for something like that. Meaning, you require more zchuyot. At a time of divine anger, a person requires more merits. A person requires more caution, not less caution, more caution. A person requires more effort, not less effort. So says the Gemara, are you going to tell me that if you're wearing a garment that is required to have tzitzit and you didn't put the aman, I can understand why you would get punished. But if you're wearing a garment that's not required to have tzitzit, you're still going to get punished? Ela hachi kamar le. This is what he meant to say to him. You're making an effort to wear a garment that doesn't require tzitziot. That's a negative. That's not good for you. In other words, at a moment where there is divine justice stretched out over humanity, at that moment where there is kitrug, where in heaven there are prosecuting angels laying out a person's iniquities, a person's sins, a person has to make every effort to increase their merits, to increase their positive actions, to increase their cautionary actions, to be more protective, way more than in what we would call normal times. And I'll give you an application that we just learned in Halakha. Halakha writes as follows: that it's forbidden for a teacher in a time when a person gives out corporal punishment. Today it doesn't happen. But when people give out corporal punishment, you should not hit from Shiva Sar B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av. So it says, we're Friedlander, I don't get it. Explain this to me. If hitting is wrong and hitting is potentially dangerous, so then you shouldn't hit all year. And if hitting isn't potentially dangerous, then it should be permitted even during the 3 weeks. Which one is it? So it says, we're Friedlander, very obviously. During the 3 weeks, because of the nature of the Midat HaDin, something which normally would not be problematic can become problematic. Something which is a little bit borderline becomes outright no during this period. And therefore, a person has to be particularly careful at that time. So now we can understand Rav Moshe Cordovero. When Rav Moshe Cordovero says that if a tzaddik gets on a boat with a bunch of Rishaim and the boat sinks, even the tzaddik could die, even though he wasn't deserving of it at that time. The answer is because the tzaddik had to be more careful, even if he didn't sin on his own. However, by virtue of the fact that he's on the boat, he requires more zchuyot, and that he may not have. As the Midrash writes, "Ve'ena Satan mikatreg ela b'shata sakana." At a time of danger, the Satan's persecutions are augmented. That's when he's really out to get us. And at that moment, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is much, much more demanding of us. And moments like that, even the righteous can fall. At times like that, even those that are the tzaddikim can fall. At that time, the person has an obligation to be particularly careful. We're almost out of time. So let's just try to synopsize things here. So what we see is as follows. The idea of hashgacha pratit is constant and real. Kadosh Baruch Hu is constantly overlooking us. There are 3 categories. There are the righteous, that the hashgacha over them by Kadosh Baruch Hu is constant. You have the wicked, for whom the hashgachat Hashem is almost misulak, is almost as if he's not interested in them. And you have the beinonim, the people in between, that it's an in-between status. The hashgachat HaKadosh Baruch Hu applies to everything, us and everything around us. And when we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hides his face, and he hands us over to that natural order and natural randomness, or the governing bodies, the governors, or the goyim that surround us, it increases our responsibility to protect ourselves and to be aware of our responsibilities of caution, our responsibilities of safety. In the absence of that, if a person thinks that he will not do that because he doesn't need to, if Hashem wants to hurt me, he'll hurt me, oh, it's really not something I need to be worried about, then you're potentially harming yourself and will be held responsible for that. You'll be held accountable for that. It's like going to battle with a slingshot and you're not David HaMelech. That's foolhardy. And you'll be held responsible for that. Therefore, a person has an obligation to utilize all methodologies, all means by which to protect themselves. All the more so at a time of Raccah, at a time of divine anger, at a time of divine fury. At that time, where the Midat HaDin is more out and aware, all the more so a person has to be much more cautious, person has to increase their zchuyot, person has to increase their positive actions, to not throw away safety, and to not be brazen and foolhardy, to not protect oneself. Okay, so in conclusion, so then what is the path that we're supposed to take? So number one, our obligation is lihishtadel, to do our part, to make our efforts to act with caution, with care, to protect ourselves, and to not be foolhardy. The second thing we have an obligation to do is to increase our bitachon, to increase our trust and faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I'll share with you a beautiful passage that I saw. Just bear with me as I will get it for you. Bear with me. Not this one. Okay. We all know this parak in Tehillim. What does it say? Oh boy. Here we go. Sorry, I'm not so good with this stuff. Mizmor David, Hashem ro'i lo echsar. A psalm of David. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is my shepherd, I will lack nothing. Hashem makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me to waters in a place of pleasantness. Nashiv Shovev, he renews my life. He guides me on the right path, and as benefits his name. Pay attention now. Even when I go in the valley of death, I will not fear bad, because you are with me. It's 12:57. It's Chatzot. Shivtecha mishantecha, your rod and your staff, hema yenachmoni, they will be my comfort. So let's contrast these first sections. We have two completely opposite parts here. The first section, the first part, the first section, let's see if I can make this work. No. The first section is about the positive, the good, how Hashem benefits the person only with goodness. And the second section deals with the time of danger and potential death. But look at this, it's fascinating. In the first section, it's third person. He leads me to water. He makes me lie down. He renews my life. But when the person is in a place of danger, when he walks through the valley of death, he doesn't fear any harm. Why? Ki ata imadi, because you are with me. The difference is that it appears to be that in the time of danger, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is more present, is more close. And that's exactly true. At a time of potential danger, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually much more present for us. And we need to be aware of that. Even if we're in a terribly dangerous time now, and we have the obligation to protect ourselves and maintain all of the things that are incumbent upon us for safety. However, it's a time of very potential divine closeness. One last thing, and I will best show close it. Here we go. Bear with me. One more. Let's see if I can find it. No, not this one. Yeah, here we go. So we are all familiar with this passage. The Gemara says, Esther min haTorah menayin. Where do we know Esther? Where is the name of Esther Hamalka? Alluded to in the Torah, says the Gemara, V'anochi Esther Esther panai bayom hahu. That's the pasuk I quoted to you. Hashem says, I will hide my face. You see, Esther, Esther. That's the passage. So the Gemara wanted to know where Esther is alluded to in the Torah, and Esther is alluded to in the Torah from the passage of Hastarat Panim. So the famous Gaon of Vilna said, he needs to understand, he said, I don't understand. Why, of all the Tzaddikim, did the Gemara find it necessary to find an allusion to Esther's name in the Torah? Why did Esther require this more than anybody else? Says the Vilna Gaon. Because a person could possibly believe that at the time of Hastarat Panim, a time of divine hiding, a time of divine masking. When a Kadosh Baruch Hu is wearing his mask, meaning in Galut, maybe they don't have nisim. Maybe in Galut there are no miracles. Maybe we really, Chalila v'chas, are abandoned, God forbid. Maybe Hashem really has thrown us to the elements. Maybe Hashem really has disengaged from us. Says the Pasuk, no. I may hide my face, but I'm there. And no story says that more than the story of Esther, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ever present in the story, but not visible at all. So said in other words, the idea of Astarat Panim is to increase our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and not to reduce it. And I'll finish with this. The Vilna Gaon gives an example of this. And the Vilna Gaon says, a mashal. He says there was a king. He had a beloved son, and the son misbehaved. The son didn't act correctly. So the king decided he has to banish the son. He has to send him out. And he sent the son out. That son now is exposed to the elements, nature, he's in danger. The king's not a fool. King loves his son. He wants to protect his son. So he sends out bodyguards and he tells them, listen, you go out, you protect my son from any potential harm, but do it in a way that he won't know. I don't want him to realize that you're out there protecting him. Okay? The bodyguards go out and they're shadowing the prince, they're shadowing the king's son to make sure no harm befalls him. Comes a bear. The boy sees the bear coming at him, and all of a sudden the bear disappears. Wow, pretty cool. I don't know what happened. Bear looked like it was here. I could hear it. I could see it. And the bear disappeared. Okay, that's good. Lucky. Then a robber comes out to harm him. And he sees the robber. And he goes, oh my God, I'm in danger. And he's running. And the robber disappears. At that point, he says, okay, that's too many coincidences of these points of danger. The bear appeared, and I was protected. The robber appeared, and I was protected. Maybe I really do have protection. Maybe it's my father. It must be my father. That's too many coincidences. And my father must be out there protecting me. My father must be out there watching me. So even in a moment of Astarat Panim, we have to realize that Kadosh Baruch Hu is very, very close to us. Even in a moment of Astarat Panim, we have to realize, we have to understand that Kadosh Baruch Hu is right here behind us, right here next to us. We should not be afraid. We have to be cautious. We have to do everything in our responsibility to protect ourselves and to safeguard ourselves, but we should not be afraid. We should trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he will protect us and he will help us. Now, if Be'ezrat Hashem we do that, then Be'ezrat Hashem, hopefully, by next year, we'll be able to gather together in, if not in Yerushalayim, Be'ezrat Hashem, hopefully in KINS, and Be'ezrat Hashem have the shiur there. Again, the purpose of this shiur today was in order to remind us of the process of Hastarat Panim, to understand it and its unique applications at times of danger, to learn the lessons from that, to protect ourselves, and to also gird ourselves to increase our zchuyot, to work harder on our bitachon, and to recognize that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is always with us, even in the deepest times of our galut. May we, Be'ezrat Hashem, all be zochim, all merit, to return to Yerushalayim, Be'ezrat Hashem, all healthy and well, with coming Mashiach Tzidkenu v'Rabbi Yameinu. Amen. Thank you very much.
Rabbi Raccah, thank you so very much for this wonderful shiur today. And I look forward to next year, as you said, either in Yerushalayim or in KINS. And for everyone else, just a reminder again of the rest of the day of programming, as Rabbi Raccah already mentioned. It is after Chatzot. You're allowed to sit on regular height chairs. The other prohibitions of the day, however, still are in place. At 1:40, in 35 minutes, will be the first mincha, and then at 7 o'clock will be the second mincha. Marav tonight is at 8:30. The fast is over at 1 minute after 9. And then also in between at 4:45, Rabbi Yehuda Glick and Rabbi Moshe Teragin will be speaking, and then at 5:45, there'll be a virtual tour of Herad Yom. I thank everyone for joining us this morning, and I look forward to the Geulah Shlema and the Refuah Shlema that we all need so much. Thank you very much. We will see you at Mincha or afterwards in the Shiurim this afternoon.